I don't remember falling asleep. I rarely do these days. The hiss of the radio is what woke me. That soft, crawling static, the kind that slithers under your skin if you listen too long. I was slumped in my old leather chair, still in yesterday's clothes, a thin film of sweat clinging to my face despite the cold. Outside, a blizzard whispered across the hills of Gallows End, but inside my cabin, the only sound was that low, pulsing hum coming from the transceiver. The same one my brother used before he died. I wiped the crust from my eyes and leaned forward, twisting the frequency knob with a shaky hand. The sound cracked, then flattened into a clear silence. And then, just for a second, I heard it. Valverde. My name, whispered through static. I froze. My eyes darted to the cassette deck next to the transceiver. The tape was already inside. Labeled in my handwriting, Mateo, final transmission. I'd listened to it hundreds of times over the years, every click, every rustle, every breath. But not this. This wasn't on the tape. This voice was new. I pressed stop, then rewind, then play. The familiar recording spilled out. This is Echo Unit 7, requesting confirmation. Over. A pause. Crackling. Something's wrong. The air feels thick. Then my brother's voice, trembling, strained. It hears us. Val, don't listen too long. Click. End of tape. That was it. That was all there ever was. But the voice, my name, it didn't come from the tape. It came from the airwaves. I stood slowly, heart thudding like a distant war drum. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were pressing inward. My breath fogged the icy glass window, and beyond it, the woods loomed, bare branches like skeletal hands reaching toward the roof. I didn't move for a long time. I just stared into the snow, listening. Nothing. Just the wind. I told myself it was a trick of the mind. Sleep deprivation. Residual memory from listening to that tape too many times. But the pit in my stomach said otherwise. You see, I used to work in signals, military intelligence, back before everything went to hell. I know the sound of a voice in static. I know when something is piggybacking on a dead frequency. And that was something. I sat back down and slowly turned the dial again, sweeping across the bands, listening. 103.6 megahertz used to be empty. Always. It was the frequency WZOR ran on before it burned down. Since then, just dead air. But not tonight. I heard a faint whisper again. Not words this time, just breathing. Long, slow, deliberate breathing. Like something was standing right behind the mic. Like something was waiting. I leaned in. Hello? The static crackled. Then something shifted. The hum deepened. A low tone began to pulse beneath the white noise, slow and rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. My own breath caught. Who is this? I said louder now. Is someone transmitting on this frequency? No response. Just the breathing. Just the hum. Then, in a voice too close, too cold. You're the last one, Valverde. My hand slapped the power switch. Silence. I sat in the dark, the glow of the equipment fading, the room quiet except for my own breathing now, sharp, shallow. For a long time, I didn't move. Not even to blink. That voice wasn't distorted. It wasn't masked by distance or frequency drift. It was clear, clean, and sharp, like someone was right here in the room with me, saying my name. My brother Mateo used to say radio static was just the sound of silence cracking, like something was trying to break through. I always laughed it off. But now, years after he died in the field clutching a transmitter, after warning me not to listen too long, I wonder, what if he was right? And if he was, what did I just let in? I hadn't seen the Gallows End town sign in 15 years. It leaned sideways now, half covered in rust and snow. The once bold letters were faded, streaked with black, like the place had been trying to erase its own name. I drove past it in silence, my breath fogging up the windshield. Everything looked smaller. The trees more twisted. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down like a warning. I followed the cracked road into town, past broken streetlights and houses with boarded-up windows. Most of the buildings looked abandoned, but I could feel eyes behind the curtains. Watching. My cabin sat at the very edge of town. The snow had swallowed most of the path, and my tires protested as I pushed the car through it. When I finally parked, the house looked the same as when I left it, small, square, and swallowed in dead pine. My father built it when I was 10. My brother Mateo and I used to race our bikes around the back until the woods claimed them. I stepped out, boots crunching on the frost. The cold stung my skin, but it wasn't the temperature that made me shiver. It was the quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but a silence that felt full, like something was listening. Inside, I dropped my bag on the floor and took in the dust-covered furniture. Everything smelled like would rot and old memories. I ran my hand across the table where Mateo used to set up his shortwave gear. That's where it all started, his obsession with frequencies, with the voices. I didn't believe him back then. I do now. The cabin still had power, barely. I turned on a lamp and the bulb flickered, struggling to stay alive. I opened the closet and found the equipment. My father's old receiver, Mateo's antenna kit, a tangle of copper coils and dials. I didn't need to think twice. My hands moved on their own, setting it all up on the kitchen table like I used to in the army. Years of signal work came flooding back. By nightfall, the antenna was standing tall outside, catching wind and static. I turned the dial slowly, listening. Most of it was empty. Hiss. Crackle. A hum like breathing. A few number stations, a foreign weather report. Then silence. But silence didn't mean peace. Someone knocked on the door. I stood frozen. I wasn't expecting anyone. Not here. Another knock. Slower this time. I opened the door to a woman wrapped in a thick brown coat and a scarf that covered most of her face. Her eyes were wide. Tired. She looked me over like she wasn't sure if I was real. "You're Valverde Rios?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah. I just got in." She pulled the scarf down. I recognized her. Barely. Lena Winters. We went to school together. She was older now, skin weathered, but still had that same sharp look in her eyes. "They told me you were back," she said. "You shouldn't have come." I frowned. "You knew Mateo?" She nodded. "He was different toward the end. Talking to himself. Said he was hearing things. He told me not to listen. Not to tune in. And then he was gone. I wanted to say something. Anything. But I couldn't." She stepped closer, lowered her voice. "You're going to hear them too. If you haven't already." I glanced back at the receiver on the table. "They don't speak like us," she whispered. "Not with words. They speak in memories. In secrets." "What are they?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know. I just know they use the static to get in. They whisper, until you start whispering back." She stepped away, scarf pulled tight again. "If you start hearing things, leave. Don't try to understand it. Just leave." Then she was gone. The door closed with a dull thud. I stood there for a moment, staring at the knob. Her words clung to the air like smoke. I sat down at the table again. The receiver stared back at me, silent. I turned the dial. Static. I turned it again. Whispers. And just beneath them, my name. Spoken not in voice, but in pressure. In thought. Valverde. My blood went cold. This town hadn't changed. Not really. It was still haunted. Still broken. Only now I knew the truth. It wasn't ghosts in Gallows End. It was something worse. Something that never died. It waited. It listened. And now it knew I was back. I couldn't sleep that night. The cold outside had crept into the walls, and my breath came out in little white clouds. I wrapped an old army blanket tighter around my shoulders and sat in front of my radio, set like I had dozens of nights before. The knobs felt smooth beneath my fingers, familiar. I twisted them slowly, moving through dead air, squeals, and the soft hum of static. A few stations still floated around out there. Old music, late-night trucker chatter, emergency broadcasts playing on loop, but I wasn't looking for those. I was looking for it. I didn't know what it was. I only knew that when I found the right frequency, I'd feel it in my chest. Like a soft knock under my ribs. Midnight passed. The room was lit only by the dim, orange glow of the vacuum tubes. The house creaked, the wind moaned outside, and somewhere far away a dog barked once. Then silence. That's when it started. I stopped turning the dial. Something buzzed in the headphones, low, jittery. Not quite a voice. Not quite a sound. I adjusted the tuning a hair to the right, and the static shifted. It became sharper. More to wear. It hissed, crackled, then settled into a steady rhythm. Like breathing. Then came the whisper. "Valverde." I froze. The voice didn't sound human. It wasn't a scream or a cry. It was a soft murmur, like someone talking from inside a cave filled with water and ash. It dragged my name out long, like it wanted to savor each syllable. "Valverde." I yanked the headphones off. My pulse hammered in my neck. I stared at the radio. It kept hissing, like nothing had changed. Just static. But I had heard it. It had said my name. I pressed the phones back to my ears, more careful now. The static had changed, become layered. There were voices underneath it. Not just one. Some were crying. Others were laughing, but it was wrong. like children pretending to laugh at something they didn't understand. And then another whisper rose above the rest. "You're the last listener." I blinked, stunned. The voice was closer than before. Not just in sound, but in presence. I could feel it, like it was behind me, breathing gently on the back of my neck. I turned around. Nothing. Just the shadows of the room, stretching longer than they should. I shut the radio off. No change. The static kept playing in the headphones. That's when I knew. The signal was no longer just in the machine. It was inside the room. Inside me. I spent the next few hours writing everything down. My hands were shaking. I drew the waveform I'd seen flicker across the dial, wrote down the words exactly as I remembered them. "You're the last listener." What the hell did that mean? And why me? I dug through my old files, the ones I'd promised myself I'd never look at again. The Yugoslavian mission, Operation Chanvil. We'd picked up rogue signals from a collapsed monastery, high in the mountains. Distorted chanting, cries in reverse, things that made radios overheat and clocks run backwards. I'd heard whispers then too, but nothing ever called me. Until now. I returned to the desk. My fingers hovered over the tuning dial. A whisper surfaced again, soft and gentle, barely audible beneath the crackle. "Don't trust the priest." I pulled my hand back. How did it know about Pedri? He'd just visited this morning. The voice continued, almost pleased with itself. "He opens the gate, but never closes it." I couldn't breathe. Had Pedri heard these voices too? Was he the one who started all this? I stared at the radio. It stared back in its own way, silent, humming, waiting. I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about Matteo anymore. This thing, this signal, it had plans for me. And it wasn't finished talking. Not yet. I didn't expect anyone to knock on my door that morning. It was cold, and the sky hung low with gray clouds, thick like soaked cotton. I was halfway through tuning an old Soviet signal interceptor when the knock came. 3 soft raps, spaced out like someone unsure whether they wanted an answer. I froze. No one came to my cabin. Not since I returned to Gallows End. The locals knew better. Or maybe they just preferred to pretend I didn't exist. Either way, it was rare enough to make my hands go still above the dials. The knock came again. Slower this time. I opened the door, and there he was. Tall. Clean coat. Leather gloves. The man's face held a smile too still to be real. His eyes, though, that's what struck me. Pale green, almost yellow. And empty. Like stained glass in a church window, reflecting nothing. "Valverde Rios?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. He nodded anyway. "Good. I wasn't sure you'd be home. Who are you?" He stepped forward a little. Didn't ask to come in. Just stood on the edge of the porch like he was claiming the space. "Father Pedri Vance. I'm the spiritual caretaker for this area. I heard you returned to town recently. Thought I'd stop by. See if you needed anything." I gave him a long look. "You're a priest?" "I used to be." He smiled again. Too smooth. "These days I offer broader guidance. Gallows End has its own needs." I listened. That word. Listen. It pressed something deep in my chest. I forced myself to stay calm. "I'm not religious," I said, arms crossed. "Never have been." "Neither are they," he said softly, glancing toward my old radio equipment through the door. "But they still speak." I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. "What do you want?" Father Pedri looked up at the sky for a moment. The clouds had darkened. Wind pushed through the trees with a strange whistle, almost like a breath. "I've seen others like you," he said. "Men who hear the crack between worlds. They think it's madness. Some drink themselves quiet. Others, they listen too long." I didn't respond. Not out loud. But something behind my eyes flinched. "I'm not here to judge," he said, reaching into his coat. "Only to offer clarity." He pulled out a small, worn cassette tape. It looked ancient. Yellowed label. Handwritten, "The Breath Between Worlds." "What is that?" I asked. He held it out to me. "Something old. Something your brother may have heard. Maybe even recorded." My hand moved before I could stop it. I took the tape. Pedri smiled and leaned closer, speaking low. "Don't play it on anything digital. Analog only. The spirits don't trust ones and zeros. Too clean. They like things with dust and hiss, where they can hide between the layers." I looked up sharply. "You knew my brother?" "I know of him. I know what he heard. And I know why you're here. Guilt is a heavy radio, Valverde. You've been tuned to it too long." I took a step back. He raised a hand in peace. "Play the tape when the wind shifts. Not before. And remember, once they know you're listening, they never stopped talking. With that, he turned and walked off down the snowy path like a shadow moving over glass. I stood there for a long time, tape in hand, the cold air biting at my skin. The wind pushed against my ears like a whisper that hadn't yet decided on words. I didn't go back inside for hours, and when I did, I didn't touch the tape. But that night, as I lay in bed, radio off, wires unplugged, I still heard them. Faint, distant, repeating the same word over and over again. Valverde, Valverde, Valverde. They knew I had the tape. They knew I was listening. And worst of all, I wanted to hear more. The air was sharp that morning, thick with fog and the kind of cold that settles in your bones. I took the dirt road out of town, past the old grain silos and dead cornfields, toward the blackened hill that overlooked Gallows End. That's where the old radio station stood. WZOR 103.6, what used to be the voice of the valley, was now just a rotting husk of brick and rusted metal. The place had been abandoned since the fire back in '78. They said it was electrical, said it sparked from the transmitter and took the building in minutes. But people whispered otherwise. Something about voices coming through the speakers moments before the flames. Something about a scream on air that didn't sound human. I parked just off the trail and stared at the building from the tree line. The chain-link fence had long since collapsed. Crows perched on the skeletal tower above, watching like they were waiting for me. I stepped over the bent fence, boots crunching the frost-bitten ground. The station loomed ahead, walls cracked, windows shattered, the front door hanging by one hinge. A sign dangled from rusted chains, the painted letters barely visible. WZOR 103.6 FM. The moment I stepped inside, the silence felt different. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It was heavy, thick, like the air itself was holding its breath. The main hallway was littered with ash and broken equipment. A hallway light fixture hung by its wires, swaying gently, though there was no wind. My flashlight flickered as I moved past the walls, covered in old band posters and black mold. I reached what used to be the main studio. The console was still there, charred and twisted but intact. A thick layer of soot coated the floor. I ran my hand across the mixer board. The knobs were melted in place. Burnt tapes sat like tombstones on the shelves. But then I saw them. Marks on the floor. Beneath the layer of ash. I knelt and wiped it away with my sleeve. Symbols. Perfect circles, jagged lines, and strange lettering etched into the concrete. Some looked carved with a knife. Others smeared. Like someone had painted them with their fingers, using something thicker than ink. I took a step back, heart pounding. There was a shape to it, a pattern. The circles spiraled inward toward the center of the room, like a coiled antenna. And in the center was something I couldn't ignore, a rusted mic stand, still upright, wires wrapped tightly around its base. But the cord didn't lead to a wall. It disappeared down into the floor, into a hole no wider than a fist. I crouched to look closer, and that's when I heard it. A low hum. Not through my ears, but through my teeth. A vibration in my jawbone, subtle but growing. Then, from the mic, a whisper. Valverde. I staggered back, flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls. The room seemed to pulse around me. My breath clouded in the air, and I realized it was colder here than outside. My skin crawled. I should have left. Every inch of me screamed to get out. But I stayed. I leaned back down and touched one of the symbols. Static filled my mind. Not sound, just pressure. Like I was being tuned. Adjusted. Suddenly, I wasn't in the room anymore. Flashes. A voice screaming over the radio. People chanting. A girl with black eyes speaking backwards into a microphone. A hand turning a dial, slowly, as blood poured from the speakers. Fire. So much fire. Then silence. I blinked. I was back on the floor, hands shaking, heart pounding like a war drum. My flashlight had died. The mic was now humming louder. I turned and stumbled out of the room, out of the station, into the cold air of morning. I collapsed against the hood of my car, gasping. That wasn't just a broadcast room. It was a ritual chamber. And someone, maybe Pedri, maybe someone long before him, used it to open something. The voices I'd been hearing weren't just figments of my mind. They had a source, a frequency, a place. 103.6. WZOR wasn't just transmitting radio. It was transmitting hell. And now it was waking up again. And I was already tuned in. I stopped sleeping. It wasn't a decision. It just happened. Somewhere between the soft muttering in the static and the dreams that bled into waking life, I forgot what it felt like to rest. Nights in Gallows End were too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed on your chest like wet wool. The kind that made you hear things even when nothing was there. But for me, something was always there. It started 3 nights ago. I had just tuned my Hallicrafters SX 42 to 4.905 MHz, an old frequency I used during field missions. I don't know why I tried it. Habit, maybe. Muscle memory from the days when I wore a uniform and followed orders. I told myself I was just testing, checking the gear. But that night, the static wasn't static. There was a rhythm in it. A low, pulsing beat like breath through teeth. Then it shifted, slowly, like something turning to face me. And then the voice came. Valverde. I froze. It was Mateo's voice. My brother. But wrong. Too calm. Too slow. Like someone trying to remember how to be human. I leaned in. My hands were shaking, but I didn't touch the dial. Why did you stop listening? It asked. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I started recording everything. Not on digital, those signals get scrubbed, lost. I used reel-to-reel tape, the same kind I used in '94 during the border intercepts. I recorded 12 hours straight. Played it back. Every minute, the voice grew louder, clearer, and meaner. It whispered things I never told anyone, things I'd buried deep. You left me there, in the fire. You heard me scream. You closed your ears. I clawed at my temples. My vision blurred. I told myself it was a hallucination. A trick. Some leftover trauma. I'd seen worse. I'd survived worse. But that night, I woke up on the floor with blood under my nails. And something else. Symbols. Carved into my forearms. Not deep, but deliberate. Etched like I was writing something down in sleep. I rushed to the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot. My hands were trembling. The markings weren't random. I recognized the shape. A sigil. One I'd seen drawn in ash at the ruins of W's Yoar. I vomited in the sink. The next morning, I visited the one person in town who knew about the station before the fire, Jerry Colton, the former broadcast engineer. He lived in a trailer behind the scrapyard, half-blind and chain-smoking filterless camels. The place smelled like burnt oil and mothballs. When I showed him my arms, he went pale. That's the speaker's mark, he muttered. What the hell does that mean? He took a long drag, exhaled slow. It means they chose you. You heard M too long. Now they hear you back. I left without saying goodbye. Back in my cabin, I unplugged the radio. Disconnected every antenna. Pulled the batteries out of every shortwave. And still the voices came. From the pipes. From the floorboards. From behind the walls. They laughed when I screamed at them. Mocked me when I prayed. Repeated everything I whispered to myself. One night, they said something new. We need your mouth, Valverde. My mouth. I taped it shut and sat in the dark, heart pounding, until the sun came up. That morning, I found a fresh sigil carved into my wooden desk. But I hadn't touched a blade. I hadn't even left the chair. I'm not sure where this ends. But tonight, I can feel it deep in my bones, like old radio static in the marrow. They're not just whispering anymore. They're waiting. Waiting for me to speak back. And I think I already have. Even if I don't remember it. Even if it wasn't really me. I woke up to a sound that didn't belong. The radio was off. The wires were cold. Yet something hummed. Not outside. Not even in the walls. It was inside my head, like a faint signal trying to force its way through my skull. I stumbled out of bed, bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor of the cabin. My eyes were dry from lack of sleep, and my hands trembled as I reached for the receiver. Nothing but static. White noise. But it felt alive. Then the knock came. 3 short taps. Sharp. Hesitant. I opened the door to find Mrs. Latham from across the road, wrapped in her long green coat, cheeks red from the wind. Her eyes were wet. I hadn't seen her this close in years. Valverde, she whispered. It's my grandson. Something's wrong. I followed her through the snow-covered street, past sagging fences and crooked mailboxes. The whole town looked like it was being swallowed by winter. We entered her home, old, dimly lit, quiet. A single lamp flickered near the stairs. She led me to the boy's room. Little Jamie sat on the floor, knees hugged to his chest, a small battery-powered radio next to him. It was still on. Just static. But loud. Too loud. He stared at nothing. His lips were moving, but no sound came out. Mrs. Latham whispered, he was fine last night. Just playing with that old radio he found in the attic. Now he won't speak. Won't eat. Keeps listening to it like it's saying something just to him. I knelt beside him. His skin was pale. He blinked once when I waved my hand in front of him. Then his mouth opened and I heard it. Valverde. It wasn't his voice. It was deeper, broken, like two voices trying to speak at once. I grabbed the radio and yanked the batteries out. The sound stopped, but Jamie didn't even flinch. He just rocked back and forth, his lips forming silent words. I left the house with the broken radio in my coat pocket, my breath heavy in the cold air. This wasn't a coincidence. The voices weren't just for me anymore. Back in the cabin, I sat down and stared at the broken device. It looked harmless. Dusty old harmless. But I knew better. I turned on my own radio setup again, hesitating for a moment as the static returned. This time, I didn't even tune it. The sound formed words on its own. You let him listen. You gave us an ear. Another one gone. My throat went dry. I whispered, "What do you want?" There was no answer. Just laughter, soft, cruel, echoing inside the static. I spent the rest of the day digging through my brother's old notebooks. Diagrams, frequency patterns, journal entries half scribbled in the margins. One passage stood out. They don't need bodies. Just listeners. A brain is enough. Once they find a frequency that fits, they move in. I stared at that line until my eyes blurred. Mateo knew. That's why he tried to destroy the radio before he died. That's why he said not to listen too long. I thought it was guilt eating me from the inside. But it was something else, something alive. Something listening back. That night, the radio clicked on by itself. I didn't touch it. A voice whispered, "Your brother heard us. You hear us. The boy hears us." The sound turned sharper. Meaner. "You're not the last listener, Valverde. Just the best." I shut the power. Pulled the cables. Smashed the tuner with my fist. But even in the silence, I could hear it. Alohum. And underneath it, my name. Like always. They weren't trying to break in. They were already inside. The cold wouldn't leave my bones. I sat in the corner of my cabin, the one spot the static hadn't touched. My radio equipment was scattered across the floor like a body after a fall. Some wires still twitched like they remembered the current. I hadn't slept in 2 days. Maybe 3. The voices had gotten bolder. No longer shy whispers in the static. They were speaking in sentences. Clear. Sharp. Always personal. They knew me. They knew the operation in Yugoslavia, the names we burned from the records. They called out to me in my brother's voice, then laughed when I answered. It was a sick game. One night, I heard my mother's lullaby through a dead transmitter. I threw a mug at the wall so hard it split in two. I thought I was going mad. Then Pedri came back. He knocked gently. Too gently, like a doctor walking into a dying man's room. I opened the door without thinking. His black coat was covered in melting snow, and steam rose off his shoulders like he'd walked out of hell itself. His eyes were calm, too calm, like a man watching a funeral he planned. "I figured you wouldn't sleep again," he said, stepping inside without asking. The moment he entered, the cabin felt smaller. The air got heavier. My ears buzzed, not from the cold, but from pressure like standing next to an engine. He glanced around at the torn wires and broken radios, nodding like he'd seen this kind of destruction before. "They're speaking to you more often now, aren't they?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He already knew. Pedri placed a wrapped bundle on the table and carefully opened it. Inside was a device, an old studio microphone from WSOR. Its wire was frayed, and its base was cracked, but I could feel the heat coming off it, like it had been used recently. "This was the first one we used," he said softly. "It's how we invited them in." He looked at me, that strange smile still plastered to his face. "You don't know how lucky you are, Valverde. Most people live their lives deaf to the world beyond. But you can hear their pain, their hunger." I swallowed hard. "You call that lucky?" He laughed. "You think hell is fire and chains? No, it's noise. Endless, twisting, screaming noise. And you've already dipped your ears into it." I wanted to throw him out. I should have. But I was stuck, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and curiosity. "What do they want?" I asked finally. "They want freedom. Form. Flesh." I stared at him. "And you want to help them?" Pedri sat down slowly, like a man settling into confession. "I believe they are echoes of something greater. Messengers left behind when heaven closed its gates. We call them demons because we're afraid of what they know. But they remember. They remember before time, before man, before silence." His voice dropped to a whisper. "They need a listener, Valverde. Someone who can stabilize the frequency. Someone broken enough to hear without going completely mad." Now it was clear. He didn't come to warn me. He came to offer me a role. You think I'm the key? I asked. I know you are. The trauma, the death, the war, the guilt, it tuned you like an antenna. That's why they come through so clearly to you. You're open, whether you want to be or not. He leaned in closer. And they're so eager to speak through you. I shook my head. I'm not your prophet. I'm not a vessel. I just want to shut them out. Pedri smiled wider than ever before. You could. But imagine, just for a moment, what if you didn't? What if you let the signal complete? You could hear Mateo again. Not fragments. Not mimicry. Him. Whole. That nearly broke me. A small part of me wanted it. Just one more conversation. A real one. To say goodbye. To ask why he climbed the tower that night. But I knew better. Those voices lied. They wore familiar faces like stolen coats. I don't trust the dead when they speak through static, I said coldly. Pedri stood, wrapping the microphone back in its cloth. You will, he said. When the gate opens, you'll listen. We all do in the end. He left without another word. The door closed softly behind him. I stood there, heart pounding, watching the frost reclaim the window glass. Outside, the snow whispered as it fell. Not words yet, but tones. Building. Layering. And somewhere deep in my bones, I felt the frequency shifting again. Something was coming. Something louder. I don't know how long I've been awake. Time has twisted into something unrecognizable. I sleep with one eye open now, if I sleep at all. Every shadow seems to move. Every sound carries a whisper. The radio is no longer necessary. The voices don't need it anymore. They've learned how to crawl through the silence. It started 3 nights ago. At least I think it was 3. I was lying in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, when I heard my name, soft like a breath. Valverde. I didn't move. I just listened. Val, you shouldn't have come back. It was Mateo's voice. But it wasn't. There was something in it, too clear, too perfect, like someone trying too hard to sound human. I turned my head slowly toward the corner of the room. Nothing there. Just the coat rack. But the whisper came again. This time from the wall behind me. Don't leave us alone. Not again. I sat up, heart pounding. The radio wasn't even plugged in. The entire setup had been smashed 2 days earlier when the voices wouldn't stop screaming about the gate. And yet they kept talking. I tried to drown them out. I turned on the TV. Just static. I picked up an old cassette player, popped in a tape, music from my teenage years. All I heard was breathing and soft, wet chewing. I threw the thing across the room. Nothing made it stop. I left the house. Walked through the snow in just my coat and boots. The air was thick and still. Even the crows didn't call anymore. I walked until my feet burned. Ended up at the edge of the woods, near the old trail Mateo and I used to take when we skipped school. The trees were black silhouettes against the gray sky. I didn't hear the wind. Just that low, humming static that now lived in my ears. And then something worse. Laughter. High-pitched, chattering laughter. Like children hiding in the trees, waiting for me to get close. My breath fogged in the air. I turned slowly. A figure stood in the woods. Too tall, too thin. Its arms were long, almost dragging across the snow. No face, just a swirling blur where the head should have been, like a signal that couldn't tune in properly. It didn't move. But I did. I ran. Didn't stop until I reached the cabin. Slamming the door behind me, I tried to catch my breath. My lungs burned. My chest ached. I collapsed on the floor. And the voices, they laughed. Through the vents, through the floorboards. From the sink drain, and behind the windows. You're the key, they said. You're our speaker. I don't know how long I lay there. But eventually I blacked out. When I woke up, I was in the hallway. There was chalk on the walls. Symbols I didn't remember drawing. Circles with lines through them. Strange letters. A spiral carved into the wooden floor with a knife, my knife. I should have been afraid. But I was beyond fear. I was numb. I crawled back into my room and sat against the wall, breathing slow. Then, just before sunrise, the radio turned on by itself. The dial spun on its own, landing on 103.6. The voice that came through was clear. Calm. Familiar. It was Mateo. But this time, it really was him. Val, he said. I didn't breathe. I don't have long. They're using my voice. But I got through just for a moment. Tears filled my eyes. I'm sorry, I whispered. They're almost ready, he continued. The station. The tower. Pedri's finishing the ritual. You have to stop him. I pressed my hand to the speaker, like I could reach him through the wires. How? I asked. How do I stop him? The static thickened. His voice began to fade. You know how. You were trained for this. Use it. Wait. Mateo, wait. But the radio went dead, and the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the kind that waits to scream. That's when I knew. I wasn't just listening anymore. I was broadcasting. The wind howled through the trees like it was warning me, or maybe begging me to leave. But I didn't move. I stood at the edge of Gallows End, just outside the old WZOR radio station, my breath fogging in the freezing night air. The building was no longer a burned-out shell. Lights flickered behind the boarded windows. A low hum, deeper than any machine I'd ever heard, pulsed through the ground and up my spine. The frequency was alive. It had started earlier that evening. I was at my cabin, surrounded by blueprints, wires, and circuit boards, when the static began to rise again, louder this time, more insistent. Then came the voice. My brother's voice. Valverde, don't let it speak. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't a hallucination. It was him. The frequency had pulled him back, or something wearing his voice. I turned on the scanner. The signal was broadcasting on 103.6 FM again, clear and strong, like it had never been silent. But what I heard chilled me to the core. Whispers layered over whispers, screaming in reverse. And beneath it all, a single steady chant that grew louder by the minute. Open the gate. Through the voice we return. I dropped the headphones and grabbed my gear. The disruptor I had built over the last 2 weeks, based on old military tech, buried manuals, and pure desperation, sat on my workbench. It looked like a strange metal heart wired to a car battery and a frequency tuner. When activated, it would blast a countersignal strong enough to scramble every analog channel within a mile. If I was right, it would shut the broadcast down. If I was wrong, well, I wouldn't be around to care. I loaded it into the back of my truck and drove toward the station. Now standing outside, I could feel the signal crawling along my skin, like 1,000 ants just under the surface. The closer I got to the doors, the heavier the air became, as if I were walking underwater. Inside, I could hear it. Not music. Not voices. Wailing. Human, but not. The kind of sound that makes your stomach twist and your mind go soft. I pushed the door open. The room beyond was transformed. Where the charred remains of mixing boards used to be, now stood twisted towers of speakers, wires tangled like roots, glowing with a faint red pulse. Symbols had been etched into the walls, scratched into the paint, bleeding from the plaster. The air smelled of burned copper and something else, something sweet and rotting. At the center of the studio stood Pedri. His back was to me, arms raised, fingers trembling as he spoke into a rusted microphone that hissed and sparked. His voice wasn't alone, other voices layered over his, matching his pitch and rhythm. The effect was nauseating. My eyes watered. My ears rang. I stepped forward. Pedri! I shouted. He turned slowly, his face half lit by the flickering red light. His eyes were glassy and full of something ancient. Something not his. Valverde, he said, smiling. You made it. Just in time. I lifted the disruptor from my bag and held it tight. What the hell are you doing? He tilted his head. I'm finishing what they started. The gate is nearly open. You can feel it, can't you? It's beautiful. No, it's not beautiful. It's wrong. He stepped closer. The static grew louder. The room seemed to stretch, like the walls were breathing in and out. You heard him. Your brother. They can bring him back, Valverde. Full voice. Full memory. No static. No loss. I almost faltered. Almost. But then I saw the shadows moving between the speakers. Tall. Thin. Crooked. Not human. They shifted without sound, but their presence pressed against my chest like an iron weight. I flipped the switch. The disruptor powered on with a high-pitched whine, shaking in my hands. Pedri screamed, grabbing at his head as the countersignal surged through the room. The speakers burst one by one, vomiting sparks and black smoke. The chanting stopped. The symbols on the wall bled out, dripping down like melting wax. Pedri staggered back, his mouth open in a silent scream. And the shadows? They screamed too, but not through mouths. Through the walls. Through the signal. One last surge, and the disruptor exploded in my hands, throwing me across the room. I hit the wall hard and blacked out. For a moment, I thought I had died. But when I opened my eyes, there was silence. Real silence. No static. No whispers. No voices calling my name. Just the sound of fire crackling from the ruined speakers. I sat up slowly, staring at the broken microphone, at Pedri's motionless body curled near the transmitter. The signal was gone. But something told me it wasn't over. Not yet. The snow was falling harder when I reached the hill where the old WSUR station stood, its antenna tower now glowing with a low red pulse that bled through the clouds like a wound in the sky. I parked just far enough that the voices couldn't crawl through the engine again. I didn't need them whispering in the hum of the ignition. I stepped out into the night with the disruptor strapped across my back, a box of copper wires, magnets, and madness, built from salvaged gear and one desperate idea: kill the frequency. The station door creaked open, as if it had been waiting. The moment I crossed the threshold, warmth wrapped around me, not comforting warmth. It was thick, unnatural, like walking into someone's open mouth. The hallway lights flickered to life on their own. I didn't touch a single switch. As I walked deeper, I heard it. The broadcast. Not from a speaker. Not from a radio. It was in the walls. In the floor. In my bones. A low hum climbing steadily. Beneath it, a voice. Pedri's voice. He wasn't speaking English. He wasn't speaking any language I recognized. It was older. Rotten. The syllables clawed at my mind, making my teeth hurt. Every vowel felt like a scream held underwater. I passed by a room where the walls were covered in spirals of cassette tape. They moved without wind. Twisting. Writhing. Pedri had turned the station into a shrine. When I reached the studio, I stopped cold. The room was alive. The floor pulsed like a heartbeat. The mixing boards glowed with unnatural light. Some of the dials were made of bone. Real bone. The air smelled like burnt ozone, and something else, something wet and sour like rotting breath. Pedri stood at the center. He wore a long coat soaked in symbols drawn in blood. Not red, not fresh. Old and brown and thick. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked pleased. "Valverde," he said, his voice smooth like velvet dragged across glass. "You came just in time. The gate is almost open." His eyes were black. Not in a poetic way. Literally black. No white. No color. Just twin pools of dark, bottomless water. I took a step forward and lifted the disruptor. "Turn it off, Pedri. Stop the broadcast." He laughed. "You still think this is about sound? No. This is about voice. About command. About listening long enough that your soul forgets it's yours." I turned a knob on the disruptor. It began to whine softly. Pedri flinched, just slightly. The static in the room grew louder. From the walls, the ceiling, even the floor tiles. They hissed like snakes, whispering my name in layered tones. "Valverde. Valverde. Valverde." Pedri's voice cracked into something deeper. Not his voice anymore. Something else was speaking through him. "They gave me their tongue. I gave them your ears. You were always the listener. Your brother delayed them. You will complete the ritual." The portal began to open. It wasn't flashy. No swirling light. No vortex. Just a slow tear in the air behind him, like the fabric of reality was pulling apart with invisible hands. And behind that tear, darkness. Moving. Breathing. I pressed the final switch. The disruptor screamed. A wave of inverted sound tore through the studio. The walls cracked. The floor rippled. The light bent inward. Pedri screamed. His body convulsed, twisted unnaturally, limbs bending the wrong way. The symbols on his coat burned bright, then burst into flames. The air caught fire without smoke. His mouth opened far too wide, farther than human, and a dozen voices poured out at once. They screamed in agony. They begged. They cursed. I didn't listen. I stepped forward, holding the disruptor steady as it overloaded. Sparks flew. My fingers burned. My ears rang. But I didn't stop. Pedri fell to his knees, screaming in that ruined voice, and reached toward the gate. "No, you don't understand," they promised. And then his body folded inward, collapsing into itself like paper in flame, gone in a flash of white-hot silence. The gate tore itself shut with a sound I can't describe, like the last breath of a dying world. And then nothing. Just me. Alone. In the studio. The machine's dead. The air still. The silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I dropped the disruptor and fell to my knees. I don't know how long I stayed there. Eventually I got up, walked out into the snow, and didn't look back. The antenna wasn't glowing anymore. The voices were gone. But deep inside I knew the truth. They had spoken to me. And they knew I had listened. The station was still burning behind me when I stumbled out into the cold. Snow fell softly, like ashes drifting from the heavens. My ears were ringing, no worse than ringing. It was like a deep, hollow throb inside my skull, as if silence itself was pushing against the walls of my brain. I could barely see through the blood and smoke, and my legs barely held. But I walked. I didn't know where. I just needed to get away from that cursed place. The flames had swallowed Pedri. I saw it happen. 1 second, he was shouting into the mic, his voice layered with dozens of others, like a choir made of nightmares, and the next, the disruptor exploded in white-blue light. Sound twisted into something solid. The walls cracked. The floor pulsed. Pedri looked at me in that last moment, and I swear he smiled. Then he vanished into the signal, like he'd always belonged to it. The wind howled across the empty town. The streets were dead quiet, not even the usual buzz of old electric poles or the hum of faulty transformers. Gallows End had gone mute. Just like that. But it wasn't peace. It was something worse. I returned to my cabin weeks later. I had stayed with a trucker outside town for a while. Told him my home was filled with mold, and that I needed to stay away until it aired out. A lie, but one that made enough sense. I couldn't tell him the truth. That my radio bled. That it whispered secrets about his dead wife in his sleep. I kept to myself. Ate when I remembered. Slept when the nightmares took a break. But when I came back to the cabin, I noticed something. The static was gone. The radios, every single one, from the busted military comms gear to the beat-up shortwave I found in Mateo's box, were silent. No white noise. No crackle. Just quiet. I should have been happy. Relieved. This was what I fought for, right? To shut the signal down. To break the link between their world and ours. But the silence, it didn't feel right. It felt like a breath being held. I tried to adjust the dials anyway. Old habits. I scanned through the frequencies, hoping, dreading, expecting something to leap out at me. But nothing came. Not even the soft hum of dead air. Weeks passed. Maybe months. Time felt strange after the gate closed. Sometimes I swear I could hear something, not from the radios, but from inside the walls. A memory of static. A whisper trailing behind a gust of wind. But it never lasted more than a heartbeat. Then one night, during a storm, I saw it again. A faint red glow deep in the woods, where the station had burned. I stayed in the doorway of my cabin, hand wrapped tight around the old revolver I swore I'd never use again. The light flickered once, then died. Just a trick of the mind, I told myself. I'd said that before. Tonight, I'm writing this down because I know I'm not the only one who's heard them. There were others. There are always others. They speak to the broken, to the grieving, to those of us who sit in the dark and listen, long after everyone else has stopped. They feed on attention, on the ears that stay open, on hearts too hurt to close. But I stopped listening. I haven't turned the radios on in weeks. Until now. One last time. Just to be sure. I reach out. The dial is cold. I twist it, slowly, hearing nothing but the soft click-click of the tuning knob. Still nothing. Until a crackle. Then a whisper, deep and low, like it's coming from beneath the earth itself. Valverde. I freeze. I don't know if it's real. I don't know if I ever turned the radio on at all. But I know one thing. They remember me. And they know I'm still listening.